We're going to finish up the last unit of our class by looking at how humans have affected food crops and where they came from and how they've changed over time. Agriculture emerged at several locations across the planet between 5 and 10,000 years ago. We're going to look specifically at the Middle East, we'll look at Southeast Asia, and we'll look at Mesoamerica as examples of places where agriculture got started. Humans have been around for a long time, perhaps 2.5 million years. Species were different than Homo sapiens, which emerged 2 to 300,000 years ago. But Homo habilis and erectus and Neanderthal man, all these forms of humans were here for some long time and coexisted with Homo sapiens for some time. But Homo sapiens have taken over the planet. Agriculture, the domestication of plants started relatively recently and probably began with small tribes that began to domesticate animals and plant seeds. And this changed everything. One of the miracles of agriculture and gardening is that it happened at all. Most plants are not really suitable for cultivation. Among the 250,000 species of angiosperms, flowering plants on the planet, as many as 3,000 of them have been used for food, mostly fruit and seeds. But only a couple hundred have been domesticated. And really, most of our food energy comes from less than a dozen plants, mostly grains and potatoes. The fact that agriculture exists at all is pretty amazing, given that most plants really are not suitable for cultivation. But, once a plant had been selected for domestication for use in a garden or a farm, it's changed considerably by artificial selection, so-called artificial selection. Humans have continued to um, save seeds from better and better plant types. Corn has gone from this wild teosinte type to the modern huge eared corn variety, and tomatoes have gone from a very, very small fruit to a relatively large fruit. Things changed over time by human intervention. Most plants are not useful for domestication. Domestication comes from the Latin domere, which is a word for household or home. And when you bring a plant into your home and domesticate it, whether a plant or an animal, you start to manipulate it and take responsibility for it. Most plants don't do well in this situation, and not every locality across the planet has plants that are suitable for human use. So that agriculture emerged at some few places around the planet because there was great biological diversity and a few plants were suitable for farming. Those plants that were suitable for domestication then began to travel. The diffusion of plants across the planet represented a close association between humans and its natural vegetation, a coevolution, much like the flowers and the bees and the flowers and the birds. Humans and grain crops, particularly, have co-evolved to create a close association that created what we think of as civilizations. Although a number of theories on this, most anthropologists agree that domestication did not happen in response to hunger, but more opportunity. It was started by people who had enough food to remain settled in one place and created a dump or a compost and noticed that plants, good plants, useful plants, would emerge year after year. Also, agriculture emerged from places where there was a lot of biological diversity, lots of opportunity for plants to be domesticated. Although there were a number of places on the planet that agriculture seems to have emerged and different plants emerged from different places, we're going to look at three: Eurasia, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Mesoamerica, and wonder, what was happening that was so special about these locations that humans began to find plants that were suitable to domesticate. The archaeological record suggests that the first place on the planet where humans began to farm consistently was probably in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East and surrounding areas sometime between around 10,000 years ago. The crops that emerged from this area are bread grains, grapes, olives, and of course apples from Kazakhstan are among those that continue to be used today. Probably a test question. These crops that were then domesticated in the Middle East, where there was a great amount of biological diversity at the time, would then begin to diffuse throughout the world. So, why was the Mediterranean region a center of origin for many of these food crops? Well, probably one of the reasons is the climate. Long, dry summers, long growing seasons, and mild, rainy winters provide an excellent place to grow grains. Plants that could survive long, dry periods, such as grasses, were suitable for the Mediterranean region. Also, the dry weather during the late fall harvest season was appropriate for grain crops, and the mild, rainy winters would recharge soil water. There are lots of grass species that can be grown in this area, but most of the small seeded grasses were not worth harvesting. Large seeded grasses, such as wheat and barley, thrived, however, and became staples in this region. In addition to crops like the apples and the olives that are known for coming out of this region, there are certain crops that are thought of as foundation crops, foundation for the emergence of civilization, urban growth. Wheat and barley being grass plants that produce a lot of carbohydrate, and lentils, peas, and chickpeas among those founder crops that provide excellent protein. The domestication process includes not only the planting, cultivation, care, and harvesting of wild grains, but also changing those grains over time. One of the problems with grain crops is that when you have a seed head, part of that seed head has seeds that may mature and fall off before the rest of them are ready to mature. Shatterproof types of grasses have a whole seed head that gets ready to mature at about the same time, doesn't fall on the ground. This improvement was a major step in cultivation of barley and wheat. Today, the production of grain is really big business, highly mechanized and highly industrialized. This region of extraordinary biological diversity has resulted in lots of different crops that have spread throughout the world. I'm going to ask you to remember for the test that wheat and barley, lentils, peas, and chickpeas are the foundation crops, but there's lots of others you can just be aware of. All right, let's move on to Southeast Asia, another area of biological diversity. And the crops that emerged from this area, the foundation crops, this is probably a test question: rice, citrus, taro, which is a root crop here, bananas, and sugarcane. And here too, these crops spread throughout the region. The most important crop in this region is surely paddy rice. Rice is a grain, a grass, once again, and it can be grown in flooded fields. Flooded fields are used because these fields prevent a lot of weed growth, and the rice has a hollow stem which allows it to get oxygen down to its root system. These plants are grown throughout Southeast Asia. Rice, which is grown largely by hand in much of the region, is even grown on the steepest hillsides. And the major plants in this region that provide a foundation for most of the development of culture and civilization are millet, rice, soybean, and mung beans, things that you'd often find in an Asian diet. But there are lots more crops that come out of this region of high biological diversity. The third region we'll look at in this class that's been identified as a center of origin for crop plants is Mesoamerica, Central America. Interestingly, this region saw development of agriculture much later than the other two regions, closer to 5,000 years ago. And the crops that we think of as coming out of this region, maize or corn, tomatoes, peppers, and squash. And much like the other two centers of origin, great biological diversity occurring in this tropical region of Mesoamerica. It's been suggested that crops that emerged from this region spread much more slowly than from the other centers of origin. Jared Diamond, in his book Guns, Germs, and Steel, suggested this is because they were moving against latitude. Moving north or moving south required changes in temperature, and the plants adapted more slowly than those plants that spread east and west from the other two regions. And the founder crops from this region, corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters. And of course, the interaction of humans with these crops changed these crops over time. The ancient ancestor of maize or corn is thought to be teosinte because of genetic similarities in these two crops. While corn has changed over millennia, it's also changed dramatically in the last couple of hundred years. These native types of corn varieties that were introduced to early European settlers are quite different than these large corn varieties that are grown today. And then scientists have changed corn even more dramatically more recently. Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT, is a bacteria that's a natural pathogen of the caterpillars that feed on corn. You can see some of the damage here. Bacillus has been bred right into the corn so that this natural bacteria has become part of new modern corn varieties. And from this region of Central and South America, many crops have emerged from this center to be grown worldwide. Most of the crops grown in North America actually came from the South and South America. Very few are actually native to North America north of Mexico. Sunflower is one. A few others are blueberry and strawberry. You might want to know about blueberry and strawberry and sunflower as native crops to northern parts of North America, north of Mexico, for the test.